As you can see, if you watch this channel regularly, I have new glasses. Not entirely sure what I think of them, but I have them and that's it. Okay, so there is a sort of apocryphal story about Joseph Heller, somewhat late in his career, when a journalist said, you didn't write a book better than Catch-22, his first novel, and his answer was, neither has anybody else. Ironically, he probably did write a better book than Catch-22, Something Happening, which I thoroughly recommend. It is brilliantly funny, brilliantly insightful novel about family, about work, about frustration, about suburbia. So yes, and I want to talk about a book that which has just been published. It's won the Prix de Goncourt in France. It's now been shortlisted for the Man Booker International Prize. Compass by Mathias Enard. As you will notice from the blue cover, it is published by Fitzcarraldo Editions, one of my favourite small presses in the UK, who in fact won my small press award for counter narratives. And just an aside, the colour of the fiction run of Fitzcarraldo Edition is International Eve Klein Blue, which was a blue designed or developed by Eve Klein, a conceptual artist of the 60s who died young. And it is really just the perfect blue. And the reason I mentioned the Joseph Heller story at the beginning is that Mathias Enard wrote one of my favourite novels ever, Zone, and a novel I have called the most serious work of fiction of all time. So, which is clearly ranking it very high. Now the thing is that Compass is a brilliant novel, but it's not as good as Zone. But that's not to say that it isn't and won't be one of the finest novels published this year. Zone, for me, is a bar that I can't imagine any novelist will surpass in terms of writing at that pitch about such large kind of moments in history. What's interesting about Compass is that its world is slightly smaller. It's actually still quite big. Essentially, it's a novel about the Middle East. Now, Enard by training is an Arabist, an academic, and this novel is about the history of Arab studies, European Arab studies, and its kind of impact and the conversation it has with the Middle East itself. Formally, it is similar to Zone, in the sense that it has a kind of dreamlike quality, and and the protagonist, it moves in and out of different it moves out of different sort of time signatures, in the sense that sometimes it's very precise when he's awake in his apartment, and then sometimes we're moving through countries, going back 20 years, going back 10 years, back 5 years, and it's all very kind of interleaved. The brilliant kind of formal invention here is that it all takes place over one sleepless night by the protagonist. And you could argue that this is a novel about unrequited love. The kind of thrust of the narrative is him in his sleepless night reliving his moments with this other a French. He's an Austrian musicologist who specialises in Arab and Middle Eastern music, and there is a French academic who's interested in particular women who spent a lot of time in the East, in the Middle East in the 19th century, and he's very much in love with her, and she's very much her own person, she's just got in touch with him, and everything kind of spirals, and the whole story is this kind of unrequited love. But actually, what it is the most extraordinary journey through 200 years of European perceptions of the Middle East. But the narrator spends time in Iran, in Istanbul, in Syria, and you also have the shadow, obviously, of the Syrian war, because this was written a couple of years ago. Even though the war has got increasingly worse, it is a kind of looming presence. So the book feels hugely topical. The other interesting part about it is that in many ways, all the places that our protagonist goes to in this novel, we can't go to now. The parts of Syria and parts of Lebanon, even Istanbul is a dangerous place to be. So it's almost there's almost this point where he's writing just before the West and the East, almost, and Istanbul is obviously that pivot, have sort of separated, and we can only kind of see it over from one side of the Bosphorus over to the other. So it's almost a kind of elegiac work. Because we have no idea what our relationship with the West, relationship with the Middle East will be. So it's a hugely important work. It's beautifully written. It is, as with Zone, so well translated that one doesn't ever think for a second this is not a novel written in English. But if you have any interest in the West's relationship with the Middle East over the last 200 years, the notion, Edward Said's notion of Orientalism, how we interact with the Middle East as a sense of otherness, that we see ourselves through them, that we are defined by them, and we try and define them by what we see as them. That there is that extraordinary conversation, which to a certain degree has been conducted from a kind of power structure of the West, because obviously after the Ottoman Empire, the Sykes-Picot Treaty carved up much of the Middle East between the French and the English. It's a hugely complicated world, and it's become more complicated. And he's giving us this brilliant novel, but actually making us aware of how Europe has carried on this great conversation with the East, and great love affair with the Middle East. I mean, if you think about, there are so many academics and soldiers and artists who have gone to the Middle East for inspiration. So yeah, it's what can I say? I was going to make this quite short, but I've gone on simply because it is deeply rich, fantastically engaging, informative, beautifully written, and deserves the highest and widest and most serious readership. But is it as good as Zone? No, which tells you how good Zone is. Thank you very much.